how you set up one of these jigs and actually cut a through dovetail, and then how we cut some half-line dovetails. And then we'll go into how you handle rabbited drawers and things like that in these jigs, because that's what they never show you at the shows or anything like that. I'm just adjusting all these hold downs to the right place. Okay. Now we'll throw up my cheat sheet. Okay, cursor. You can see here stock thickness, and that you use a certain cutter, a certain straight cutter for you, and this is through dovetails. You use a certain guide bushing, and the A diameter is an important thing we'll go into in a second. But in the case here, we have stock that is between 3 and 5/8. So another, it's actually a little below a ½ inch. So either a 70 or 75 cutter and a 140 straight cutter with a 7/16 guide bushing is going to do swimmingly. Yeah, see, we're cutting through dovetails at the moment, and with a through dovetail, you cut, well, the through dovetail, they come through each other. With a half line, they don't. Now with the through, we have to cut the tails with a dovetail-shaped cutter, and then we have to cut the pins with a straight cutter. Right. And the guide bushing jumps from 7/16 to 5/8 in a lead jig, because on those very big cutters we have to go from an 8mm shaft to a ½ inch shaft, so we have to go to a bigger guide bushing to be able to get that shaft through the center of it. So that is the reason for the change. Features like what is really the router handle that you used to buy that made them fine adjust and so on, built into the router. And a lot of them they're using with these lift plates, but a bunch of the manufacturers have figured out ways to make the router operate like it was in a lift plate by and of itself. That some of them, there's a adjusting mechanism here, but you can stick an Allen key with a handle on down through the base plate and adjust it. And so a lot of cool things coming along. So I don't know what my current best pick would be. I haven't even given that a lot of thought, but I'd look around a lot of really cool routers out there. All right, the first thing we're going to do now to make this work is take two pieces of the stock that we're going to cut, and we're going to, I've already adjusted my hold downs so that this is locked horizontally. I can now take and just undo these two handles and drop this comb there down on the work so that it is now at a common height that's in plane with the work. And of course, if I was going to cut half line dovetails, I'd be putting half the work in this part of the jig. Now, the directions, the original directions to the Lee, I think are a little overly complicated, and I simplify them a little. And in machine woodworking, the face of the work is the outside faces of the work, by definition. And usually a true face mark is to make a little curly Q like that. Let me make it with a black magic marker so it's quite readily visible. And I don't know, can you see this on camera? Yeah, all right. The mark that a woodworker would traditionally make was that. And then he would come on what was called the true edge and make a little point at the same spot that pointed to the true edge. And this would now be the outside of our work, and these are what we would call the faces. Now, a somewhat easier way to keep track of this in modern times, where we have machine that's of stuff that's come out of planers and joiners and is theoretically about the same thickness everywhere, is to use what are called carpenter's triangles. And there we would take the front and back of any box we're going to build and the two sides. And we would take the front and back and we would draw a triangle on the two pieces like this. Did everybody see that on screen? Yeah, all right. And we would take the two sides and now draw a triangle like this. And we only have to take two parts of this to very quickly see how they're going to go together. And that's called the carpenter's triangle. It's a great way to keep track of parts in your woodworking. I remember years ago when I started out, I was writing A, and B, and I never had anything where I needed it. And this is so simple, I wished I'd thought of it. It's in Tafe Reed Teaches Woodworking, and it's just a great idea. So on this stock also, if you wanted to go to the other system of marking, you would have half a triangle here, and you would have a half a triangle here. Now, is everybody following that? Okay. Now, I do everything from the true face. We're down to about number 4. We've selected a dovetail bit appropriate for the work and the guide bushing appropriate for the cutter. We've adjusted the hold downs for the thickness of the material. Our next thing is to set the cutter depth to the mating work plus 1/64th to 1/32nd. So just like when we hand cut a dovetail, we actually want the pins and tails to go completely through one another, that they actually are each going to hang out about a 1/64th of an inch to a 1/32nd of an inch proud, because it's much easier to cut that little bit of wood off to bring a nice flush fit than it is to plane the entire side of a big blanket chest down because they didn't quite come through. So we usually just overshoot there as a routine thing. Now, the next thing, this also has you placing backer boards. And if you want the highest quality work out of one of these jigs, you would put heavy stock in this part of the jig. I usually use medium density fiber board, often called MDF, and I use 1-inch chunks of MDF. I would now cut a 1-inch piece of MDF, and I would have put it in here and adjusted the comb to sit on the 1-inch MDF, and that would back up these cuts as they came through the far side of the stock and reduce the breakout. I do these lectures without backer boards because it's just so much more time to place these backer boards. But if you want the highest quality work, you have to use backer boards. If you go to number 8, the tail board, you place that in the jig with the face towards the jig and cut the tails, routing only in the middle of each finger. That's an important thing. And for the pin board, this is the only place with this jig that you put this face that we've just gone to a great deal of describing to you away from the jig. In every other case with this jig, on both through and half-blind dovetails, the face goes towards the jig. The only place it ever goes away is with the pin board in the through dovetail. So that's another good little kind of rule of thumb to remember, and one that on a lot of my jigs I have just the little phrase pin board. I have TD for through dovetail, pin board away. And I can look at that and I know that that's the only time that that happens, and every other time I'm going to put the face towards the jig. I'm going to put the tails in the longer board. And remember, the pin board is the only place where we put the face away from the jig. So we're going to take this face and put it towards the jig, just like that. You should not really force these handles, and you shouldn't turn them to where you lock it like this and unlock it like this. You should adjust them to you. When you bring this down, it gets a real nice squeeze, and you want them somewhere like this away from the work. You don't want them coming towards you. And if you push this down and turn this little block under it 90 degrees, it changes the adjustment 1/2 of the thread pitch, so that you can change really the equivalent of turning this 90 degrees by flipping that little toggle under there. Clever design. We would now adjust our icons to the right place. We're cutting through dovetail tails. That's great. But before I do that, I'm going to flip this around and adjust the spacing of these fingers. And I have to do this from this side because the screws are on this side. Now, this jig, as do most Canadian products, use Robertson drives because the Robertson drive was invented by a Canadian, and I'm quite proud of this. And it is a great way to drive screws to get the right dovetail spacing. And I could have a half pin at each edge with none in the middle. I could have one here. I couldn't quite fit another one in there. If it was a bit wider, I could have 2 full pins and a half pin at each edge. So I just adjust this, and you can adjust this by eye. It doesn't have to be to the last thousandth of an inch because they're going to cut mirror images of each other. Tails first. We simply take the router now, and we're going to, before we do that, we're going to flip the thing back. Now, cut only between these fingers right here. Now, in the manual, especially if you have a little bit wider spacing, it is possible to actually get your guide bushing in there and cut in the wrong place. Well, the manual will show you how to put little blocks of wood in there so that doesn't happen. And you may do that for a week or so, but you'll quickly dispense with that annoying thing and simply just cut in the right place. And there is our tails cut. Hey, dead reckoning was pretty good. I'm not too bad on that line.